Right then, so this morning we're talking about components in React. So by this stage of the course, a lot of you have been working on a few... Guys, can you mute yourself if you're on mute though, and you're not asking a question, just so we don't get a bit of feedback? Thank you. So, right, yep. So by now, most of you should have at least had a look at the first couple of tasks in CodeFlix. If you haven't, hopefully it will be fairly self-explanatory. But what we've done is we have imported up to 6 movie covers or movie titles just as JPEG images, and we've then displayed them on our page using some CSS, using the Flexbox property, or using the display property with a value of Flexbox, I should say. Who just said something? Is that you, Damiano? No? So make sure you mute if you're not asking a question, please.
No, I'm not.
Right, so 6 images displayed using Flexbox on our page. So if you want to follow on with your own apps, hopefully it looks something like this. So far we've just got the one main app.js file, and we've been writing all of our code inside of there up until this point, before reaching task either 6 or 7, I forget, apologies, but where we componentize our app. And that's what we're going to try and do today together. So you will have some code that looks like this. You'll have your main app div. Then inside of there you'll have various sections, maybe one section for each row, or you might have divs again, but we spoke yesterday about using semantic HTML, right? Let's be very descriptive with our tags as much as possible. So I've used some section tags for each row, and I've used figures to contain my images. Yeah, so there's some other options there rather than using div all the time if you wish. Cool. So in the CSS, there shouldn't be too much. I've just adapted what was already there from the Create React App skeleton. I've added my little basic reset right at the top that we spoke about yesterday as well. My box size in border box, margin 0 and padding 0, that's there. And then the key bit to get our display was this movie flex 1, so for each item, and you'll notice that on my section container, which I called movie row cover, I gave it a class of movie row cover, it has that display flex inside. Yeah, so they were the key bits of CSS to get our nice display, and it should have ended up looking something like 2 rows of movies. Yeah, something like that. I love the little Doctor Strange guy there, right? He's pretty cool. So yeah, hopefully you've either got something like that, or very soon you will end up with something like that. But let's go back to the code in our app.js file. And for me, from line sort of 15 down to 33 or something, it looks like we repeat the same sort of format again and again and again, right? Each one's got a figure, each one's got an image, then we close the figure, and we do that again for each movie. So that's all right. That's a good starting point. It works. But could you suggest any improvements to that, perhaps? That's an open question, not a rhetorical one. So any improvements possibly that you could think of?
Yes, we can extract,
Create a function.
we can do another component.
Yeah, so essentially this would be what we call some wet code. We're writing it every time, write every time, yeah, wet, and there's another acronym called dry. So we try and make our code as dry as possible when we design software, as long as it doesn't affect readability and usability and all that sort of stuff, yeah? So dry stands for don't repeat yourself, yeah? So we try not to repeat code numerous times. For 6 movies, it's not too bad, but let's say we had 100 movies. Do you really want to write out 100 figures? Or you know, with large applications, you're going to get more than that, right? Amazon databases with products, how many products have they got on there? Thousands and thousands, right? They don't want to have to manually write this code each time. They could use something like a function, yeah, to map over an array list and produce some output, but that output they produce will definitely be self-similar each time, yeah? Each time it's going to contain a figure with an image. The only things that are going to change, the class name's the same, look, in each case, The only thing that changes is, in this case, the source, so what image we're using, and the alt tag in this case. I could have maybe made the alt a little bit more generic. Mine are maybe a little bit different. Sometimes I've used show cover and movie cover, but I could have made it more generic to make it easier to repeat. Yeah. So Shimon suggested that we could use a component. Yeah. So what do we mean by a component in React? Any ideas?
So it's just like a reusable bit of code.
Yeah, again, really, it's a reusable bit of code, and in React, it will have a certain way of writing. There will be a certain way of writing it, and we'll see as we move throughout the workshop how easy it is to reuse components all over our application.
So is a component like a function?
A component is either a function or a class in React. So you have both function-based components and class-based components in React. Yeah. So at the moment, this is actually a component as well. This function app, is a component. And notice that it has a capital A. We need all components in React to have a capital letter. Yeah, otherwise that's going to cause some errors. If we just give it a normal app, it doesn't recognize that as a component in React. It will recognize it as a JavaScript function, but not as a component. So in general, because we're encapsulating a bit of code, it makes sense to create a new folder. Sorry, not a new folder, maybe a new folder, but a new file. Yeah, and we will put our new component in a new file as well. So it makes sense to me to call this new component movie. So I'm going to create a movie.js file. And for now, I'm just going to put it next to my app.js. So for those who aren't sure, there's this little shortcut up here. Just create a new file. And then, should I write it like that? Movie.js? No, it needs a capital M as well, ideally, yeah, to show that it's a component. Okay, and there's two ways to write our component. So we said one of them could just be a function, so I'm going to keep it as simple as possible for now and just write a function. Must have a capital. And for all intents and purposes, this will look just like a JavaScript function. What do I want this function to return? What's the bit that's repeated again and again? I could do the whole section. I'm not actually going to do that for now. I just want to create a component for the movie. Yeah, so that is the code that relates to each individual movie. Can you see that line 18 to 20 looks very similar to the bit that I've highlighted? Yeah? There's just some slight differences. So for now, I'm just going to copy that. I'm not going to delete it. Okay. So our function, or a function in React, can also return some JSX code. Yeah? It doesn't have to just be numbers or strings. We can actually return these tags here. We can return the figure tag and the image tag all wrapped together. All right, good stuff. Let's work out how we get that code into our app.js file. Does anyone know how we would do that?
Importing, exporting?
Yeah, using the import-export syntax, right? So using the ES6 module syntax built into JavaScript. So you remember at the top of our app.js file, we had this import statement here. So I could write one very similar for my movie. I could import movie, notice the capital again, from, and it's right next to my app.js file, so I can just do a dot to say I'm in the same directory. So // the same directory, and look, it's actually suggested there. Look, you've got a file called movie.js. Here it is. Do you want that one? And yes, I do. Now that won't import as it is. Why not? Because we haven't exported it. Exactly. Yeah, we have not exported it from our movie file. So we must have something like that. I'm going to use export default, because there's only one thing I want to export from this file. So default just means there's a one main thing that I want to export from that file. We've got a few errors. Have you noticed down the bottom? We've got a few errors down here. Line 3, React must be in scope when using JSX. Yeah, so in React it's fine. We can make components return JSX, but we need to make sure that we're actually importing the React module into that file. How do we do that? Yeah, the import statement again, so it's this one, right? Import React from React. So anytime you create a component, you must have that as your first line. So now most of the errors are gone, but we've still got matrix is not defined. Why is it not defined? Well, we've imported it in the app.js, but we haven't imported it into our movie.js file. So if I import that specific image, then that will mean that I can also render the image in that file. And then we've just got a warning. So we said we've done lots of hard work here. We've created a brand new movie component and we've imported it into app.js, but we haven't used it anywhere. Notice that it's slightly grayed out. It's not as bold or as prominent as the ones above it. So that's because nowhere in our function have we used the component. So let's say this time I'm going to delete my code for the Matrix movie. Then if I go back to my app, we can see that the Matrix movie is no longer there. Okay. So how this time, rather than writing all that code again, do I use the component to show the Matrix movie? What's the syntax for a component in React?
The name of the component.
The name of the component, so I just type movie like that.
In class name?
No, it's not a class name. No, it's a component. So a component you can think of as being a custom tag, like a custom HTML tag. So the syntax is very similar. We put that less than symbol. Notice it's now gone green. Yeah, and we close it off like that. Or, probably makes sense just to make it self-closing. So that is how I would use a component inside of another component. Yeah, I am taking all of the code from the movie component, which is written here in an external file, and including it inside of my app component in app.js, just by writing it in that tag syntax. Really simple, right? Really easy way to reuse bits of code. Let's double check whether it's worked, because I'm saying it's so simple and then I might have not made it work, but let's have a look. We now have the Matrix movie back. So at the moment, it's not much better. We've just replaced one bit of code with another bit of code, really. The power comes in when... I'm just going to comment this out for now, because we're going to need it in some form later. In fact, I'm just going to move it down the bottom, out of the way, so we can see how simple our component's going to look compared to what it did look like. Okay, so we actually had 3 movies, didn't we, in each section? So I'm just going to go movie, movie, movie. And something's gone wrong with my comments there, but I'm just going to do the same. 3 movies there. What's our app going to look like now?
It's going to have the matrix 6 times.
It is. It's going to have the Matrix 6 times, yeah? But hopefully it's going to have 6 movies. So we're getting part way there. Nope. So my comment, as I said, I think I mucked up my comment somewhere. Yeah, so I haven't closed my comment there. So multi-line comments in a JavaScript file, the star and the / to close it, yeah? I think that'd be okay now. Yep, so we've got the matrix 6 times. Cool, so it's preserved our layout, everything. We haven't touched the CSS. And we're able to repeat, sorry guys, we're able to repeat something, where's it gone? We're able to repeat something very, very easily now, just by writing the component name inside of a tag. But of course, if that component's very similar, but there are some differences, we need to provide it with the information of the differences, yeah? So we said there was a different image for each movie. So what functionality exists for React components that lets us differentiate them slightly? Lets us pass some information into a component.
Props.
Props, exactly, yeah. So there's properties or attributes, you know, that we use them all the time. This class name is an attribute of the div tag. Yeah, so attributes and properties, we can use that word interchangeably. So essentially we want to create a custom attribute or a prop for my movie tag here, or my movie component. So I could just call that, I'm not actually going to write AMG because we might get confused, I'm going to write image. So my image for the first one is going to be the matrix, right? We could reorder them, of course. My image for the next one, I think I had the OA next. So OA, and we can repeat this for all of our images. Goodwill Hunting. I'll just do it for the first three for now, so as not to bore you. Right, so we've passed in this information of an image, but we haven't told this function what to do with that image that we're passing in. Does anyone know how we would access the props from inside this child component? Props.something, yep. So rather than having source matrix, I can actually say props.image to access the image property. We've got an error down here, props. Props is not defined. So at the moment we haven't said, in app.js we said we're passing some props to the movie component, but we haven't told movie component, hey, actually there are some props coming your way. So how do we do that? This is how we'd write the code to access a prop, but we haven't told our movie component that there are props coming to it. Yeah. Our inputs for a function, they go there, don't they? Yeah. Any function in JavaScript, if it takes some inputs, we need to put the name of that input inside of our parentheses there. So if we type props there, we now have no error. We don't need this import anymore because we've passed it via props, and hopefully it means we're now going to get 3 different images on our first row because we've dynamically assigned something to a source, and that information comes from our image prop. Yeah, so image prop is there being passed down to the movie component inside our file. We can access that using props dot and then the name of the prop, which we called image. Let's have a look. Which one is it? It is that one, but there's that tab. Cool, and now we've got our 3 distinct images back. And then, of course, we haven't got anything for the bottom covers because we haven't passed any props to those bottom covers. I think that's a good point to ask for questions because we've covered quite a lot there in a short time. Does that make sense?
I've got a question.
Yep.
When you use props, you have to use props. You can't give it a different name, can you?
Yes. You can put them different.
So could I call them something else? Value.name or value.image?
Let's try, shall we? Value. And of course they must match, right? Obviously. Value.image. So who thinks yes, who thinks no?
Well,
I think you have to
Yes.
put the same value.
it has to be props.
So Shimon's saying it has to be props. Steffi and Cam say that as long as the values match, right? As long as the names match, then it works. And I agree with Cam and Steffi. I think you can put whatever you want. But convention is that we write the name props. Yeah, because they're known as props in React. So if you start calling it value and someone asks, where are your props? And you say, oh, it's there, it's under value. It's a little bit confusing, right? So I think it makes sense to stick with the convention here. And you'll see that later on in the course we use another more advanced topic called object destructuring. And we destructure the props into different values, yeah? And that will be a neater way of writing it. So we don't have to write props.anything. We just write the name of the variable. But we'll come to that later on.
So, another question, and that's after the return.
Still works, right?
You go back to the code.
Yep. I just had to prove it still worked, right? After doing all that spiel, Max. Yep, back to the code.
You've got the open brackets and close brackets. Now, I thought you didn't need that, you just have to configure on the HTML code and that should work. So I'm trying to understand why you've got the open close brackets.
Here, on the return.
Yes.
So you think I could have just done, get rid of those?
It worked, I tried yesterday, but I didn't wonder why, because I've seen other codes where you don't have that, so why is this case special?
It might work like that, let's see. Yeah, works like that. So you don't technically need the bracket. However, you might, if I had some extra code here. Actually, I'd probably still get away with it as long as it was on the same line. So yeah, the question I guess really is, why do we need the parentheses? So in my case, we specifically need the parentheses because I haven't written the code on the same line as the return statement. So return is expecting something straight afterwards. If I did something like that, it's returning blank, right? Look at the error. It says expected an assignment or function call. Yeah, we're expecting something there. We're expecting a statement to be returned, but we have absolutely nothing. So instead, we have to say, look, hold on, I'm going to give you something. I open the brackets, something's coming. Just read the next line and you'll find it. There it is. So the way I got around it was by moving my figure to the same line as the return, but then it's not as readable and it doesn't obey elegance principles and things like that, right? So if we're grouping things together, we can use the parentheses to just return one thing, yeah? And that one thing in this case was my JSX elements. If, for example, I had two movie covers here, it doesn't like that. We get another error. Has anyone ever seen that? Passing error. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Ever got that error? No? Maybe not. You got it just now when you were playing around? You did what, sorry? You tried adding two divs, yeah. And they were side by side, yeah? They were adjacent, these divs. Look, adjacent JSX elements. So we're not allowed to return multiple parent or multiple adjacent divs or tags like that, yeah? Two figure tags next to each other. It doesn't like it. How do we fix that?
We have to wrap this by another
Yes.
container.
We need just one container, so one thing on at the start and then the closing one right at the end, and we can put everything else inside of it. Yeah, now it's happy-ish again. It's giving me some warnings, but that's about the images in the other file. But it's happy with this code again because we've wrapped it in a parent container or a parent div. Yeah. The problem was we had two tags at the same level on the outer level. So you cannot do that. You just need one tag on the outer level.
So you can put like infinite stuff within those parent.
Absolutely, yeah. I can now put whatever I want inside. I could do that as many times as I want and it would not complain. Absolutely. What I couldn't do is put another div adjacent to it. now I get the same warning again, adjacent JSX elements, yeah? Because this div and this div are next to each other. They're trying to share the same space. Yeah, there's only room for one parent div. Or, we don't even have to use a div. You can just use an empty tag, like that. And that's called a React fragment. The longhand way would be react.fragment. Yeah, and then close the react.fragment. That would be the longhand way of writing it, but you don't even need to do it. As long as you have some sort of parent container there, you won't get that error. Questions?
Do you have to, when you create a component, do you have to have a new like tab for every one? You know what I mean?
You don't have to, no.
You can put them all in the same one then.
Yep. If you wanted to, we could create our new component here inside of our app.js file. However, again, that's not really a good practice because we could end up with one file having many components, and it's then quite hard to find the component that we want to debug. It's if there is an error, that is. It's a lot easier if we put them in their own file, because with modern JavaScript it's very easy, isn't it? We just put export default, and that means we can access that function anywhere in our code base. But if something goes wrong with the movie, I know that I've got to come to movie.js and fix the code there inside of movie.js. It's a lot easier for me to fix those 3 lines of code, or however many it may be, as opposed to fixing, well, we might end up with hundreds if we have lots of components there. Yeah. But we can easily do it. I mean, look, we'll do it now. So rather than calling this movie, we'll call it our movie2 component. And we're passing the other images in there. And this time we'll define it in the app.js, just to show you it can be done, yeah? Or you can tell me how I'm going to create it in a second. So I'm passing in my image prop. What other ones have we got left? Avatar, okay, yeah. Avatar. We've got 5th element. And then we've got, what did I have? Anyone paying attention? I've forgotten already. Doctor Strange, of course. She had a little funny Doctor Strange stuff. Cool. So I've passed my props in. We're getting the error. Movie 2 is not defined. So in other words, we need to create it. Yeah, we need to create this component. How do I create a new component? Usually we create a new file, but let's say we've already created a new file, or we just want to do it in here. How do I create a new component? Do you want to create a class-based component this time? You can if you want. We can do a class-based component as opposed to a functional one. Yeah? Or do you want to rewrite this one as a class-based later? Because functions are easier to me, but let's keep it as a function, right? Same as before. How do I say that this is not any ordinary function? It's actually going to be a component. Just make sure it's a capital. It's called movie2. What comes next? Brackets. Awesome. Space. Curly braces. My function code goes inside. What do I want to return? Yeah, we could return a figure. Inside of that figure, we want our image tag. How do I say what image I want for that image tag? src, source, yep. What's the value of my source? Avatar, just like that. Quotes. Equals quotes, avatar. Agree? Disagree? Curly braces. Why is it curly braces? Because we've stored the avatar image inside of a JavaScript variable. So anytime inside of a tag we want to use some JavaScript, we must put curly braces to say this is a bit of JavaScript code. run it as such. Yeah, it's not a string, it's actually a variable. So you need curly braces, the name of the variable. Okay. We'll forget about the alt for now. And that's it, right? Well, that
You have to put props inside of after movie 2 inside the brackets.
yeah,
No?
it would be better, right? So this is just going to have a component again that always displays avatar. So we don't really want that, do we? We want it to display props.image. Yeah, we've already passed in avatar to our component. We want it to be dynamic. So rather than using avatar, if we did use avatar, I'll show you what's going to happen. 3 avatars, yeah? Instead, if we use props.image, it's going to take the value of this prop. So the first one's avatar, then the 5th element, then Doctor Strange. Props is not defined, yep. So why is props not defined? Because we need to pass it as our input. Now we've got our 3 images back. Why do they look a bit different to the ones up there? Because it's movie 2 instead of movie? Not really.
Because you don't have the CSS.
Because we do not have the CSS class name. Yeah, nice. Look at our movie component. We had class name movie. So it was applying the style of Flex 1 to our 3 movies. However, in our movie 2 component, we didn't put class name equals, what does it say? It was movie, right? We did not put that. Now we have the sort of spacing that we had before. Yeah, the little bit of filling the full width of the screen as opposed to being squashed in the middle. Cool. So we successfully created a component there, and even though it's in the same file, movie 2 goes looking for something in the same file. If it can't find it, it looks in the imports, or maybe it does it the other way around. I'm not sure, but it will look in both places. It will look in the imports and it will look in the same file itself. Yeah, so we haven't had to import movie 2 because it's in the same file. Alright, so I think we'll just finish off with that's not the only way to write components. We can have functional components, which is what this is, and we can have class-based components, which are the ones that have been mainly shown to you in the CodeFlix videos. The modern push is to push everyone towards functional components, and in February of this year they introduced something called React Hooks, which enables you to use state and other lifecycle methods in functional components. Yeah, so we'll have a look at both ways of writing them now, see what you prefer. As I say, the future is being pushed towards functional components, so it'd be good to familiarize yourself with that. It's also useful to know how to write class-based components because a lot of existing code will be written using them. You know, anything written before February this year, that's all they had. They could only create class-based components. Well, it's not strictly true. They could have created functional components, but they couldn't have used state in those components. So, anyone know how to create a JavaScript class? Yeah, rather than using the keyword function, we use the keyword class. The format's a little bit different. We don't have any inputs, like so. Instead, we might have something called a constructor, and that is the way we get our inputs into our class. But we're not actually going to need it in this case. So we do need one other method though when working with class-based components. We need a render method, yeah. So we invoke render, we open up our curly braces, and inside of that we stick our return statement. Value is not defined, yeah. Is props defined? Should be. Props is not defined. Okay, so maybe we do need a constructor. Have you come across constructors yet, guys? No. Constructor. And we pass in. Do we need it from? Yeah. So you have to call super. You have to pass in props. Props is not defined. Class moving. Ages since I've used class components. What am I missing?
I think first of all you have to write a class movie extends React component.
Nice.
Like this. Maybe that.
Good shout. Yeah. So hopefully we won't need the constructor to keep it simple. So whenever we're creating a class component, we need to use the built-in React component template. So that's what this bit here is doing. It's extending the built-in template for a React component. We need to make sure we import that component. And that again comes from the React module up here. Yeah, so we're importing the React module there. So far we're just importing React from it, but you can also import other non-default imports from React. So we put a comma, put them in curly braces, type component. Still not liking the props component. And let's do it like that. Okay. Let's try once more with a constructor.
I think you have to use as well this keyword this dot props dot name.
Yeah, see, this is why I don't like class-based components. This dot props. Yeah, and can we do it without the constructor? Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, so every time we use a class-based component, we also need to use this keyword this in JavaScript. So what's easier for you to write? I know what's easier for me to write is to write a function. To use class-based components, we need to remember that we need to extend the built-in React component. We need to remember that we need to use the keyword this. We need to remember we need to render, call the render method. So yeah, for me, class-based components are a bit more complicated than functional-based components. So I exclusively use functional-based components when I can, but it's worth at least knowing that there are class-based components and how to write them as well. Yeah. So if we wanted to rewrite our other one, just because that wasn't the clearest explanation, we change class to function, get rid of our inputs. We might need a constructor, but we definitely need a render. Stick all of our return code inside the render. If we've got any props, we change it to this dot props. And we should be good to go. No, cannot call class as a function.
Render.
Yeah, so we haven't got the extends React dot component. Still not. Super extension. Oh yeah, okay, there we got it. Alright. Yeah, so two ways. Class-based components or functional-based components. For me, go for the function as much as possible. Shorter, neater, less confusing. Don't need this. good to go. Yeah. Cool. Any wrap-up questions?
Do you one, or like a header one, just add the name of the movie?
You want to add the name of the movie? Yeah, even if I just stick the header below it for now rather than doing the overlay stuff. Yeah. So if we had a second prop, so you're saying a prop of title or header or something like that, yeah? Yeah. How do you think you'd do it?
I'm not sure what to add the source with.
Okay, so firstly we need to pass our components some more information. So that means we need a second prop. So we can do a second prop just by putting a space. The prop name, I'm going to call it title. I'm just going to make this one a string, right? I'm not going to make it a variable. And I'll call it the matrix, right? For the title of the movie. Then, when we come over to our movie component, we could just create also a H1 tag. H1's going to be pretty big, but whatever. And inside of there, what do you think we need to put to display the title? So curly braces first, because this is going to be a bit of JavaScript again. Prop is going to be a JavaScript. And because it's a class-based component, we need this dot props dot title. Now, hopefully it might complain because no, it won't complain. It'll just be undefined. That's fine for the others. And if we go up to the top one, we can see that the title has appeared above it. Yeah?
And if it wasn't a class, would it just be the same, just like this?
So if it wasn't a class, it's a function, which is very satisfying, by the way, if you ever refactor your code. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Function needs its inputs, so let's make sure we give it some props. And get rid of both instances of this. And yeah, it's just props.title. And we also don't need the component from up there. Lovely, much better. Still works, yeah? And of course, to make sure we have all the titles, it's just a case of putting all of your different props there. Now eventually, of course, again, you won't be just hard coding this. All of the movies are going to be stored in an array or something, right? And we just map over the array, and each iteration of the map, we just return a movie component, and that will look even neater. But hopefully you'll agree that this app.js is now a lot more readable. I can see that I've got 6 movies. Really we'd have all the same component, and it just renders that bit of code each time inside of that component, rather than all of this a lot more messy, harder to read stuff. Yeah? Anything else?
So anything you want to pass as a prop, you just put it inside the tag of that, what do you call it, component?
Yep, absolutely. You put it inside the opening tag or self-closing tag. If that was an opening tag, I could just do that. Same thing, right? The props, yes, they go inside of the opening tag, and it's just the same format as any other HTML element. The name of the attribute or the name of the property, then an equal sign, and then whatever you want it to equal. If it's equal to a JavaScript variable, make sure it's in curly braces. If it's equal to just a string, of course, the same format, right? You just use a string as you would with any other HTML tag. Make sense?
Yeah. Could you just explain a bit more about why they have the 2 different types of components?
Why they have class-based and functional-based components?
Yeah.
Yeah, so historically, the only way to work with something called state, which is essentially just anything that changes in your application. So that could be if you were playing an online game and it kept score, so the state of your score would keep changing. Whenever you use state in your applications, you could previously only ever do that with class-based components in React. So that's why they existed. and functional based components were just simpler. So they existed for just displaying very simple sets of data or even storing data. Whereas now, since February, we don't really need class components anymore. It's just a preference, a design preference now if you use them. We can do everything that class-based components do just using React hooks now and using React functional components. So it's a historical reason, really, yeah?